Today I want to take a look at one of the best shoot-'em-ups ever, Apidya. In the early 90s, a small game development team from Germany decided to mimic the immensely popular style of Japanese games and called themselves Keiko, which means silkworm, but also recollection or nostalgia. Their first game, Jamix, was released in 1991 and was a rather addictive puzzle game. Their second game, released in 1992, was a breathtaking horizontal shoot-'em-up named Apidya. It had one of the most unique settings for a shoot-'em-up. The player takes control of a honeybee, in scientific terminology called Apidya. Apidya features an awesome background story, and with awesome I mean totally weird and completely non-relevant, but at least it's told in a rather nice opening sequence. The evil wizard Hexa hates his peace-loving neighbors Yuri and Ikuro, and uses black magic to summon a swarm of insects, which poisons Yuri. Thankfully, Ikuro was not at home and escapes this foul scheme. Time is of the essence, though. Ikuro has to hurry to get the antidote from Hexa's fortress to save his beloved Yuri. So he transforms into a bee, because, well, apparently he lives by the credo, fight fire with fire. Yes, that's the story. Well, it's original, alright. But honestly, any excuse to get Ikuro to transform into a bee so I can play this awesome game is fine by me. The game plays mostly like a standard horizontal scrolling shoot-'em-up, and could be described as a mix of R-Type and Gradius. The ability to hold the fire button to charge up a super shot is one of the most iconic features that remind of R-Type, with the power-up bar at the bottom that is very reminiscent of Gradius. This bar can be filled by collecting little red and yellow flowers, and allows you to choose the power-up you want. This of course adds quite a bit of strategy to the game, as it is your choice whether you use a weaker power-up that might ease gameplay right now, or if you want to wait and collect one or more additional flowers to get a better upgrade, risking losing all collected flowers if you lose your life. If this is too much of a distraction, you can set the game to choose power-ups automatically, and this works surprisingly well. Especially if you use an ordinary Amiga joystick, as that only has one fire button, because then you need to hit the space bar whenever you want a power-up. Back then I usually connected a standard 3-button Sega Genesis or Mega Drive gamepad, which actually worked very well. Believe me, you don't have this 1/10 of a second to look for the space bar while playing Apidya. You will die. Which happens quite a lot anyway. Every touch means instant death, including the ground. This will set you back a bit, but not too drastically. You don't need to repeat the whole level over and over again. Enemy formations remain the same, which means you automatically memorize the game and become better very quickly. It also means that the game is very fair, and every situation is manageable. Don't get me wrong though, the game is very hard. I strongly suggest playing the game in practice or easy mode first. While the number of enemies remains unchanged, they shoot a lot less. But practice mode has its price. The last few levels of the game will be skipped, including the ending sequence. The game is divided into 4 worlds, each consisting of 3 levels. It starts in the meadow, where your enemies on the ground is all you have to look out for. Then there's the pond, where you have to watch out for rocks and water lilies. But thankfully, our little honeybee is an avid diver, and water doesn't affect you at all. While I first thought that this was somewhat of a missed opportunity, I think it wouldn't have improved the game in any way, but rather hurt gameplay quite a bit. So I'm glad they left out all annoying water effects. Next are the sewers, and from here on the game kind of leaves the sort of medieval setting, as there are several present-day items that can kill you in the sewers. Among them, cigarettes and Pepsi cans. Yes, I am aware that the introduction sequence states that this story takes place somewhere in the 1900s, but still. We're not finished with anachronisms anyway, as it gets even more futuristic. After the short sequence where you're transformed into a cyber bee, a techno world begins. Here the setting is less original than in previous levels, and it even looks like there are levels taken from an early version of the game when it was still supposed to be a standard space shooter. Don't get me wrong though, the level design itself is even more original. It's just that the graphics could very well be taken from any other game. The last world is a strange alien-like hive that features numerous boss battles instead of yet another ordinary level, and that's a good thing. All in all, Apidya doesn't overstay its welcome, as the game's length is just about perfect. The graphics are gorgeous, with colorful backgrounds, nicely animated sprites, smooth scrolling and well-done effects. In fact, I think the game looks great almost 20 years later and puts a lot of arcade games to shame. The same goes for the sound, though the effects may not sound as big as you might expect, but they're not supposed to. They fit the microcosm the game takes place in perfectly, and are quite varied. Each weapon and each power-up stage of these weapons has its own distinctive sound effect. And the music by sound magician Chris Hulsbeck is quite simply amazing. Each world has its own musical theme, which is arranged differently in each level. This is a great idea that makes each stage sound like it belongs to something bigger, makes it stand out at the same time. You could argue that Mr. Hulsbeck has great, more imaginative themes for other games, but Apidya's music fits perfectly and has exactly the right tempo. The game has aged well. I would even go as far as to say that it is just as good and playable as it was the day it was released. With beautiful graphics, incredible soundtrack, fresh setting, great level design, and astounding mid and end level bosses, Apidya manages to be original without alienating players, and thus is a horizontal shoot 'em up that deserves its spot in every Shooter Hall of Fame.